What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a guide to spaceships in Starfield. We're going to be covering a ton of things here: combat, building them, upgrading them, cargo, basically everything I could think of and try to fit into a guide, because spaceships in this game turned out to be one of the things that I somewhat unexpectedly really enjoyed, so I wanted to give it its own video talking about some of the stuff you could do and how it works. But a few things to know right away. You'll get your first spaceship right at the start of the game. Just a short ways into it, you'll be given the Frontier to use. This is an okay ship to start the game with, but it's really just a starting point. And this is because your spaceship is a pretty integral part of your gameplay. Though how much you want to lean into that is largely up to you, you do kind of need one in order to traverse the galaxy and chase down quests, which is kind of a given. However, they do have a variety of other uses, such as hauling all of your stuff around. Right here at the beginning, it's important to note that how much you can get out of spaceships is largely dependent upon your own character's skills. The tech tree in particular is chock full of skills that relate directly to your spaceship, such as improving your weapons, your shields, your cargo capacity, the types of parts and ship classes you can pilot or build with. But that's not all of them. There are a couple in science that can make your life easier by allowing you to travel farther, or one in the social tree that will even allow you to smuggle goods more easily. So getting the most out of this does require a certain amount of skill investment. Though I would say the biggest skills to keep your eye on are the piloting skill. This is going to give you the ability to fly all kinds of ships, of course, alongside a starship design, which is going to allow you to build with the best stuff available. And just those two can take you a very long way with minimal investment by giving you access to essentially the best stuff, with further upgrades and skills simply increasing your damage and making things a little more convenient for you. From there, the next thing we need to talk about is ship services. At every major settlement you land on, you'll be able to find an NPC, ship services technician, something like that will give you access to the things you need. Here we can repair our ships, potentially upgrade, or buy and sell them. So when it comes to acquiring or managing our ships, we can either buy them outright from these NPCs, who will typically also have a small selection available. We can even sell the ones we're not using back to them, which means our options are essentially to buy and sell, of course. It's also possible to kind of just steal or potentially even find spaceships out there. Sometimes when traversing enemy bases out in the world, we can find spaceships, and if you climb in them, you can typically just take them. Even if you don't want to keep them, this can be a useful way to sell them. Though if you acquire them in this manner, you typically have to register the spaceship before you can get rid of it, which will offset your earnings a little bit. It's even possible to commandeer ships in spaceship combat this way, though we'll get to that. So from there, let's talk a little bit about shipbuilding and ship upgrading. Assuming you don't want to use a pre-built ship and you would like to do something a little more interesting, you have a couple of options. If you'd like to keep it simple just for the sake of keeping your spaceship relevant without actually building one, you can do that. Right at the technician here, we go into the modify ship menu, at which point we can click ship upgrades, which will allow us to upgrade the ship's core systems, which are the weapons, the engine, the shield, the grav drives, the reactor, all of which play a part in making our ship functional. Weapons are pretty self-explanatory, though they do come in a few types. We'll talk more about that in the combat section. Shields are straightforward but important, as they protect our ship from initial amounts of damage to our hull. Shields regenerate slowly over time, whereas hull damage has to be repaired, either at a ship services vendor or with ship repair kits, which you can find and trigger manually, much the way you would like a health item. Reactors supply power to your ship. All of these systems that we just discussed require power, and how much power they can use is ultimately up to the individual part you have selected and how much power you have to assign them. The bigger the reactor or the more powerful it is, the more power it makes that you can then assign to the individual parts of your ship during spaceship flight or combat. The more power assigned to each system, the more effective it will be, such as weapons dealing more damage, shields absorbing more damage, etc. Engines, on the other hand, are of course going to affect our mobility. However, a lot of this has to do with the mass of our ship, that is to say how big it is. Because if we have a really big ship but not a lot of engines, this will negatively affect our mobility, thus making us slower overall. So your engines need to match the mass of your ship in order for it to function well. So keeping an eye on these is important, especially since the engines themselves will also add mass, and the bigger your ship is, the more landing gear it is required to also have to offset the mass and actually land properly. Though a little bit more on that in the building section. Last but not least, we have our grav drive. In order to travel between various systems in the galaxy map, we need a grav drive. These also come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and depending on the quality of the one you are using, ultimately determines how far you can travel in combination with your fuel tanks. While regular spaceflight doesn't require fuel or anything, grav jumps do, and you don't have to refill this. It's basically just a limiting factor on how far you can actually travel. So how far you can travel in a single jump, and thus fast travel, etc., is down to a combination of your grav drive and the fuel tanks that you have on your ship. This is one area where skills can give you the convenience of making this a lot easier by increasing the distance you can travel, which is pretty important because, especially in the later game, many of the more distant solar systems require a very large grav jump capability to even reach them. Again, you can handle all of that from the upgrade menu, which can basically just let you upgrade the exact type of these systems your ship is already using. Weapons are a bit freeform, but the other individual systems simply let you upgrade directly to the better versions of the thing you already have installed. There are many others, and this is where ship building comes into play. If you'd like to do something a little more advanced and build your own ship, that's also possible. Though you do have to own at least one ship to do this because we need to bring up the ship building menu. At which point we can either use this as a starting point or we can delete everything on screen with, I believe it is the delete key by default, at least on PC, and then starting from scratch. Now everything we do here is either going to cost or save us money. If we completely delete a ship, we will gain the monetary value of all those parts as a credit of sorts that we can then start building ships back with. You can also rename your ship, which is done by checking the flight check menu. The primary purpose of this menu is to explain what your ship needs in order to fly, which will give you errors or warnings. Errors have to be cleared before you can confirm a ship build, because otherwise the ship is not operational. Warnings don't technically have to be done, but might cause you some problems, such as not equipping your ship with a shield or weapons. Now, before we go too much farther, let's talk a little bit about weapons and weapon groups. Every ship can be equipped with up to 3 weapon groups. You can put more weapons on a ship, but they won't be able to be used if you don't assign them properly. From the flight check menu, if you click the Weapons tab, you can see that you have 3 unassigned slots here, from which we can assign the weapons that we have on our ship. Though it is worth mentioning that if I assigned this missile launcher here, it will include every single instance of that weapon that I have equipped and fire them all together when I then use that weapon group, though they do all have to be the same weapon. So if I have multiple types of the same missile launcher equipped and I assign that to a weapon group, when I fire that in combat, it will shoot all of those weapon systems. But now let's talk about the more general rules of ship building. For the most part, you can kind of let your imagination run wild here, but ultimately the ship does have to be operational, which means we need a reactor, a grav drive, a fuel tank, a docking bay so you can dock into space stations and other ships. You also have to have a cockpit so you can pilot the spaceship. But outside of the essential stuff, let's talk a little bit about how this works. So as you can see from the menu here, we can either hit Q or T or simply click on the tabs to parse through our available options. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory and consist of things we've already talked about. However, there are things like the structural tab that allow us to add slightly more cosmetic touches to our ship. If you want to add a porthole so you can see out of the ship into space, this is where you would do that. This is also where we can add cargo bays, which will increase the amount of things our ship can carry for us, as it does act as a sort of storage for all of the junk we pick up, which is especially helpful because our ship's inventory can be accessed from other places like vendors or crafting tables, so we don't need to carry around a lot of things with us. Now, as you can probably see on screen here, when we select an individual item, it will populate on screen, of course, and allow us to maneuver it, but it also shows several points where we can snap it to other pieces of our spaceship. This is contextual, meaning that the piece you have selected in the menu will only show available places on the spaceship you can actually connect that piece to. It's also possible to flip these pieces and things to maneuver them exactly the way you want, and moreover, if you use the arrow keys, you can cycle through variants of individual items for the ones that have that extra contextual menu on the bottom portion. Another thing to keep in mind is the livable area of your ship, which is another one of our menus of ship parts. This is technically the explorable area of the ship, outside of the pilot's seat, of course, and it's going to be where your crew hangs out. This largely determines the amount of crew a ship can have, in addition to whatever your skills also sets as a limit. All of this combines to make a pretty free-form shipbuilding system that only has a few things you really need to keep in mind in terms of stats. Your hull health is a combination of the health of all the individual parts you've made, the strength of your shield, which is going to be the shield you have equipped, your cargo space, which is the result of all of the cargo space of individual areas of the ship, and then this can be added on to greatly via specific cargo bays, your max crew size, which is dependent on how much livable area there is, your jump range, which is dependent on your grav drive and skills. But then we have mobility, top speed, and mass. These are all kind of a function of one another, because every single part we add to a ship increases its mass. In order to move more mass, we need more engines, though even the engines themselves will lead to more mass being added. So your sort of engine to mass ratio is important and is going to determine how fast your ship can actually move and maneuver, which comes up quite a bit in space combat, as you might imagine. Mass also determines how much landing gear you need. All in all, though, I was really impressed with the shipbuilding. It felt like a really intuitive system that lets you do more than use just pre-generated ships, and I liked it a lot. But we're not done yet because we have cargo and smuggling. Now, the space of this we've already discussed, as the amount of things we can store on our ship is dependent upon our cargo bays and the passive space on the rest of the modules. In order to access this, though, directly from the ship, there's usually a screen somewhere in the pilot area that will allow you to access it. You can offload all your stuff in here. Stuff you pick up in space will just be automatically added to your cargo inventory, and you can sell things as well. But the fun doesn't end there, because we have things like smuggling. Some items are marked as smuggled goods. These are typically obvious things like human organs or stolen artwork, etc. If you have any of these things in your possession when you enter the vicinity of a major settlement of one of the factions, they will scan your ship looking for contraband or smuggled items. But it's possible to sort of circumvent this and allow you to take these things planet-side, where you might be able to offload them for extreme amounts of credits. In order to do this, we need one of two things: a skill that will reduce your chance of being detected by these scans, or cargo bays specifically designed to shield you from these scans. Ideally, you would like both, but it is a percentage chance to be discovered, so you might want to take your chances, I suppose. But know that if you get caught, you will be placed under arrest as if you had committed any other crime in a major settlement. But now let's talk about spaceship combat. This is an area where your skills really come into play beyond just the design of the spaceship, as there are all sorts of skills that contribute to your ability to use certain weapons effectively, or give you access to thrusters that help you maneuver, or even just lock onto your target and attack individual portions of their ship to disable them. But basically, we're going to get in range of our enemy ships and then fire one of our 3 weapon groups and try to destroy or disable enemy ships. Different weapon types will perform differently against shields or hull damage. For instance, laser weapons or particle beams do really well against shields in particular, but ballistic weapons do better against an actual hull. There are also electromagnetic weapons you can get, which are theoretically the best at disabling ships altogether, and you can also even shoot missiles, though you do typically have to be in range for them to be locked on in order for them to be effective. From your ship, you can also hail other friendly ships, which will initiate a dialogue for them. This is used in a handful of situations, one of which is Piracy. If you come across certain ships that haven't engaged in combat with you, you can hail them, and you might actually have the option of piracy to force them to surrender their cargo on a percentage chance basis, dependent on the strength of your ship versus theirs. They might resist and try to blow you out of the sky. They might just give in and give you their stuff. It's also possible to dock enemy ships in the middle of space combat if they are the last enemy ship you are fighting and you disable their engines. At which point, if you get close enough to them, you can trigger the dock option, which will allow you to take out all of the enemies on board, with the added benefit of being able to steal their ship afterwards. Outside of combat specifically, this also comes up in a variety of situations, such as boarding space stations or other ships for quests, things like that. If you happen to take a bunch of hull damage, you can also repair this via ship parts, which act as healing items for your ship that recover the ship's health over time, which can help make you a little bit more survivable. Overall, though, I would say combat really comes down to whether or not you have the stats to beat enemy ships or not, which is especially noteworthy in fights against multiple ships or fights with, let's say, legendary ships that might even command a small fleet that you could potentially take on. In fights like that, how well outfitted your ship is going to come into play a great deal, and if your ship isn't up to snuff in that regard, you might want to just avoid it altogether. Last thing I want to talk about here is your crew. Your ship can be staffed, so to speak, with various crew members. These can consist of your actual companions or crew members specifically. At every major settlement, there is usually an area like a bar or something where you can go to recruit individual crew members that can then join your ship and help you pilot it around. Crew members assigned to your ship can lend the skills that they have to what you can do. And through this method, it isn't entirely necessary for your character to have every skill available to them when it comes to spaceships. This helps you offset some things and maybe avoid having to invest tons of points into spaceships to do things like participate in the combat. From the crew menu, you just assign them to your ship and you're pretty much good to go. You'll receive the benefits of their skills. And they'll also be wandering around your ship and be available to talk to in the case of your companions. All in all, though, I would say that's just about everything you need to know about spaceships in Starfield. I certainly hope you found it interesting. I'd love to know what you think about this system down in the comments section below. And honestly, I'd love to know what people are creating or how much they're using the ship builder versus just upgrading, or if they're just buying ships outright and not dealing with it. Because I genuinely think this is one of the better things that Starfield has going for it. I really enjoy this system. I think it's very cool. So I hope people enjoy it as much as I did. Regardless of all that, though, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.